I'm Amanda, and this is Not Your Granny's Quilt Show. Welcome to today's episode. With me today, I have Jemima Flendt of Tied with a Ribbon. She is a former teacher like me and a crocheter as well as a quilter. And I'm so excited because today we get to chat about those things that we have in common, but also her new book called Quilt It, Crochet It. That is a book of patterns that has the quilt pattern as well as the matching crochet pattern so that you can make the same quilt and crocheted blanket to have the same pattern. And I just love that concept of being able to make the quilt or crochet the blanket and still get the same look. It's such an ingenious way to merge the two crafts. And since I love both of them, it just really sparked my interest. And I could not wait to talk to Jemima about it today. So I hope you guys enjoy. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jemima. How are you?
I'm good, Amanda. Thank you for having me. It's so nice to get to chat.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I've followed you for a while and just seen, your work and found that we have a few things in common. And so I thought, oh, I just want to talk to her someday. And so it was really exciting to hear back from you and get to set this up. And I was nervous about the time difference because I'm like, I don't know how to set up like that big. It's like a whole half a day.
That's it. Yeah, here in Australia, the time difference is a little tricky but once it's all worked out. Yeah, it's always good to have a chat. And as you said, we have quite a few things in common. So it's nice to be able to talk more about those.
Yeah. And we will get to your book. So I don't want you to think we're not going to talk about that because that's an exciting thing too. But I just want to kind of go back and like, so were you teaching before like crafting or quilting, or was that kind of intermixed with that? Because that's one thing we have in common. We were teachers.
Yeah. I always loved crafting. It was something I had done since I was, a young kid, and I'd always been around a lot of my nana sewed and my mum sewed, and so there was always that element around the house. And then I went to uni and became a primary school teacher, and did that for a few years, and then left primary school teaching, vowing, never to go back. I sort of decided it probably wasn't what I had thought it was going to be, and I went out into the world and worked full time for a little while. And then whilst I was there, came across someone who had suggested to me maybe I should try, or why had I never considered home ec teaching?
Mm,
And that was something I was like, it was just this light bulb went off, because I had never considered home ec teaching. It was always, I loved quilting, I loved baking. I was doing a lot of it
mm,
in my early 20s, and used to do that all the time. And it had never occurred to me that home ec teaching might sort of be something that I was interested in. So I went back to uni and did my major in home ec, and then went out and absolutely loved home ec teaching. It was just such a rewarding type of work, because I worked generally with a lot of our vocational students, so our year 11 students and our year 12 students, who were really more looking at entering the world of becoming chefs or hospitality. So
mm.
it was and I worked a lot. I had those students mostly sort of all the time, so it was good. Different from sort of lots of classes of lots of kids and that sort of thing. But it was. And then the craft, like on the side, I had been doing my quilting and started to write patterns and going to markets and selling them. And
Oh,
then
wow.
that kind of just got to the point where I was literally sort of one foot in one camp and one foot in the other camp. And I kind of got to this point where I was enjoying writing patterns and doing the business side of quilting, that it was time to make a decision which way to go, whether I was going to go back to teaching or sort of jump into the business, more on a full-time level.
Yeah. That was kind of how I got to. My mom and I were, we had started the business, but she was doing it mostly, since she could be home with it and I was still teaching. But the more I would interact with the business on my breaks and during the summer, the more I was like, I think I'm done in the classroom. And which was kind of a bummer because I had just gotten my master's degree. And so the
That's
timing
a big
was,
achievement.
yeah, it was rough. And it was like the end was right, or the end of my program was right during when, lockdowns and everything were starting for COVID. So I had to do the last bit. It was already an online program, but I lost access to, you know, a lot of situations that would have been required for some of the big projects I had to do. And so then I just had to kind of fudge numbers and wing a couple of things because I didn't have access to my students anymore. And so it was wild. But anyway, yeah, it was hard and it
Yeah.
was fun. But yeah, I got to the point where I was just like, I'm done. I need to lean into what's making me happy. And it was quilting. So it's kind of
Yeah. Well, I
where
think for any teacher out there, they would, the whole world of teaching through COVID was a completely,
mm-hmm.
new experience. And I can certainly see how it's just, really difficult for teachers, as with many, many sorts of careers and vocations that, through that time, it's definitely changed things for people.
Yeah.
But yeah, getting our kids, in the classroom and all that is, yeah,
Yeah. It's
exciting to sort of see them getting back.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. And even when they were trying to put kids back so soon, I was like, this is too soon. Like, but also I don't want them at home either because they're not getting anything done. So it was tricky, but um
Absolutely.
anyway, so but home ec sounds fun. I think if I felt like going back to teaching, I would probably departmentalize and go into a specific course like language arts or something, just
Hmm.
or use my master's degree maybe in educational technology, but it just didn't feel like the right path anymore. So, which, I'm all for people changing trajectory and finding what makes you happy and getting really good at that. And if you find you want to change again, then change again. I mean, our lives are so short. Why stick yourself in one lane and never change anything? So,
Well, I think too, it really is that whole building block,
mhm,
element of, one thing leads to another and then it leads to another. And
yeah,
your skills aren't necessarily, from one thing aren't relevant in a new job or a new career. It's, you can literally, especially in teaching, you can take things that you've learnt and then apply them in different areas. And
mhm.
my dad has a bit of a chuckle that, I've got several degrees and I'm not literally using them, but
Yeah.
they are very much the core of my business in terms of my teaching. And
Mhm.
whilst, I may not be in the classroom at a school, I'm certainly using that degree and, or those several degrees and the knowledge that I've learnt in the classroom. And that's, I guess, too, why I love to specialise a lot with beginner quilters and, people starting out, because I've been in that classroom situation with younger students starting and, touching a machine, sewing machine for the first time and learning how to thread it and those real basic skills that I think all things really do build in our lives to keep us, moving forward.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think, um, yeah, for me, just like same thing. It's a lot of the skills I learned with even just my master's and feeling more comfortable around like the technological aspect of what it means to run a business now and being able to navigate the, computer stuff like
Hmm.
that. My mom's like, oh, you have a educational technology degree. You can figure this out. I'm like, that does not translate like directly. Like just because like I have that degree doesn't mean that I just know how to like run the long arming program. Like
Yeah, they're not the same.
no, so you but so you're still teaching classes and things and you had said you were doing some teaching the previous week. And so what was that for?
Yeah, so I was just away at Australian Quilt Convention, which was held in Melbourne. So I travelled interstate,
Okay.
and whilst I was there, I was teaching. I had two sets of workshops over the 4 days, and very much what I do within quilting now is actually a lot of teaching, a lot of workshops, a lot of either going to stores or going to guilds, or um, the educational side of teaching people how to quilt, and not just my designs, but other quilts and that as well. So I love to be able to get to travel to do that, and was over last year in New Zealand at Quilt Symposium.
Oh, wow.
And so that was an amazing 5 days of teaching over there, and I just love that element of being in the classroom with quilters and new quilters and people starting out in their own quilting journeys, and showing them and sharing my knowledge with them so that they can learn and be inspired, and really want to take that, keep going with their quilting, learn the next thing. So
Yeah.
so teaching is very much a big part of what I do.
Yeah, that's incredible. And what a fun adventure to get to, even if it is just interstate, just getting to go somewhere different and teach a new group of people, and just giving them that time and attention is, especially when you feel really good at the thing, that you're
Hmm.
teaching. It's super fun. And yeah, that's awesome. And so
Yeah.
will you go again next year? Is
There,
it?
I've got another couple of later this year. I'm headed back to Melbourne, and I'm headed to Adelaide. Headed back also to New South Wales. So I've got a few trips coming up later this year where I'll be teaching at different events. So
Oh,
lots on the cards, and just I'm on the west coast of Australia, so
okay.
it's quite a way to travel over to the to the east coast, but it's good. I've got some family over there as well, so it's always and friends, and
Yeah.
always nice to go over there. But just going and meeting up with quilty friends from the other side of Australia, especially as we haven't had that chance in the last few years with lockdown and that. And
Hmm.
it's just been amazing. My last trip in Melbourne, I had got to catch up with some of my quilting colleagues, um, who are either in the distributorship with me, or people who I've met or been inspired by, and getting to sort of see them in Melbourne for the first time in since 2019, really. So
Oh,
it's
wow.
it's good going and being amongst people who know what you do and also
Hmm.
love what you do. So it's almost like that little, it's like but being with people who just understand you without having to explain
Yeah.
necessarily what it is that you do, or because they know and they understand, and
Yeah.
they also understand all the things that come with running a business.
Hmm.
Sometimes the trials, and sometimes the things that are tricky, and that. So it's always good not only to meet students, but also to then be inspired by people in the industry who you look up to as well. So
Yeah. That's so fun. And yeah, it's so nice to be in a room of people who know what you're talking about, and you're not explaining the basics and having to like backpedal to like get into the nitty-gritty details of something just to tell
mhm.
them a story about something. It's like I love talking about quilting, but yeah, it's a completely different thing when you're talking to people who just know. You can just talk about it. You don't have to like preface it with any extra information or things that as a quilter you just already know, and so you don't have to talk about those details
Mhm.
necessarily. And it is different for sure, and it feels so good. Like I think that's partly why
Yeah.
I do this podcast, because like I have my quilty besties, they my best friends quilt, and so but it's like I don't want to only talk about with them. And I love talking to and learning from
Mhm.
so many different people. And yeah, just being able to talk about quilting without boring my husband to tears, or you know like call my
I
sister, she's like, I
totally
don't care.
understand that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so
Some of my
that's so
friends
fun.
now, they're so excited because they can recognize fabrics that I work with, and they know the names, and
Oh yeah.
so we'll be chatting, and they'll mention, oh, I saw the quilt that you're working on with the tulip pink fabrics, and it's just like this little hand clap, because it's like, oh,
Yeah.
you sort of forget that people who are not anywhere within your quilting realm, that they do pay attention. And oh, I loved how you did this with the Betsy fabric that you were working with, and it's like, oh wow, she knew I was using my Liberty Betsy fabric. And
Yeah.
yeah, it just lights you up as well when people who just don't know their background is not quilting, or they don't quilt themselves, but
Hmm.
they're paying attention to what you're doing. And yes,
Yeah.
and also supporting you as well, through
Yeah.
you writing books and all the other things, like, oh, how did you asking the questions, how your your course launch went, and all those things,
Yeah.
yeah, it's nice to have people in your corner.
Hmm. It really is. And even if, yeah, like they're not doing the exact same thing you're doing, it's like, they're your people when they cheer you on no matter what. So
Hmm.
whether they're
Absolutely.
in the quilty world or not, if they're a cheerleader for you in your
Hmm.
good times and in your bad times, then it's like, okay, you can stick around.
That's it. Yep.
I'll keep you.
Yeah, I've been talked off the ledge a couple of times, but by some of my my friends, and with them being able to see things that I can't necessarily see because you're just so in that moment and so in that.
Hmm.
But yeah, I've definitely had some times where, yeah, it's actually my friends who have made me see, what I'm doing is what I'm supposed to be doing, and that
Yeah.
encouragement to keep taking that next step forward. So it's
Yeah.
absolutely, without a doubt, having people in your corner.
Hmm. Yeah. It makes a huge difference. And, just, yeah, somebody to pat you on the back when you're having a rough day and say, you're doing
Hmm.
great things and just keep it up. It's like, okay, it
Yeah.
makes a huge difference. Even if it's from
Mhm.
afar, it's like, as long as you've got somebody, it
Yeah.
makes it a little easier to handle those situations, which is so nice.
And was it your mum that taught you to quilt, or is that where your love of quilting came from?
Ah, she didn't start quilting until about a year or two before I did. And it was her friend who got her into it. She's always been so crafty and has sewn since she was a little girl. So she has, tons of skills. And she used to make clothing for us or sew little projects. Or if I wanted to like redecorate my room, she would redo the curtains and just, kind of home decor kind of things.
Hmm.
She made some of my formal gowns for, dances in high school and all that. But yeah, she didn't start quilting. And so it was actually, so it's, me and my three best friends, and two of them, Jen and Beth, they had started quilting before Miranda and I. And then they finally were like, you guys are going to quilt. And Miranda and I were like, ha ha ha, you're so funny. And dragged us to the fabric store, made us pick out fabrics, pick out a pattern. And then they're like, okay, we're going to hold your hand, but you guys are going to make quilts. And we're like, fine. So that's really where, I mean,
You
yeah,
gave in.
yeah. So it was, I wouldn't say fun because I came home crying that night because I mean, we spent the whole day working on it. And I was like,
Hmm.
if I'm going to make a quilt, it's going to be big. So I made a twin size as my very first quilt, and that was a
Wow.
mistake. But they got me through it. And so once it was finished, I was like, okay, I want to keep doing this. So yeah, but
Yeah.
my mom would try to teach me to sew and use the sewing machine, but I just had so much anxiety around that. Like I didn't want to break her machine or do anything
Hmm.
that would ruin it. And so I just was like, never mind, I don't want to do this. But my grandma, my dad's mom, she had taught me how to crochet when I was around 10. And I did it for a little while and then I set it down. But then I picked that up again in college and I've been crocheting ever since then. Like we started
Hmm.
making hats and scarves for the unhoused population that was in the town where I had um, started college. And so I got back into it then. But yeah, it's been around, but
Hmm.
I had to be forced into it.
Pushed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Little push.
Yeah. It was
Hmm.
loving but firm. I think it was our very first episode because Miranda started this podcast with me, but we had talked about that experience of them. We act like it was so mean, but they were actually really nice about it. But
And
yeah,
look at you now.
Yeah. I'm like, well, I made a business, so I don't know.
That's it. So yeah,
It worked out.
you showed them.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
you also crochet, right? Okay.
Yeah. Um, my nan taught me how to crochet when I was probably about 6 or 7,
Okay.
and I kind of look at it now how that's really come full circle, because essentially that was really the first craft that I was shown how to do. And I used to just make these granny squares until essentially they were too big for me to lug around.
Mhm.
And I used to take scrap yarn from anyone who would have any spare. And so as a young child, I just used to take these granny squares and make them to that size. And then they actually, my nan used to take them. She was part of the Seroptimists here in Western Australia, which is a women's charity organisation,
Mm.
and she used to take them, and they used to be auctioned off.
Oh.
And that blows my mind, because it's like, well, obviously they were, feeling, you know all the money went to the right places and all that, of course. But it was like, I think, oh gosh, a crochet blanket made by a 8-year-old or a 9-year-old. But it was just really, I loved the repetitive nature of it. And still, within even my quilting now, just I do love, the repetitive nature of some of the tasks. I
Mhm.
can sit well with it. But just, yeah, crochet was something that I really just, I loved it. I could do it anywhere I wanted. It didn't require a lot of equipment. And when you're making just one big granny square, it didn't really, as a child, you just had to learn one stitch. And I
Mhm.
think the reason I did granny squares is because Nan would help me start in the centers and get me
Mm.
started, and then I could literally just go round and round.
Yeah.
Um,
They're
but
very easy to grow.
yeah, that's it. And I kind of, when I started quilting, I was about 16, and I think by then I'd long sort of put the crochet aside.
Mhm.
And it probably wasn't until I had crocheted for a little bit, sort of when my girls were little, when I wasn't sort of sewing so much. And
Mhm.
then I kind of picked it up again, and probably about 5 or 6 years. And it's very much that, that, like riding a bike, it just,
Mhm.
that muscle memory just kicks back in. And I just found myself, instead of wanting to sew at night because I was sewing all day long and creating patterns, that I found that at nighttime I was enjoying sitting down to crochet at nighttime, to
Mhm.
replace that whole just constant sewing. So it was
Yeah.
kind of it became my relaxation from sewing through the days. And that was
Yeah.
kind of, yeah, kind of just kicked off again. And immediately sort of, yeah, you just get back in. You just, the pun of, you're just hooked, literally, from
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
from from that first couple of stitches. And yeah, it's
Mhm.
there are a couple of big you know patterns that I just love and enjoy making. And then, yeah, I never kind of expected it to be part of my business. It kind of, that was accidental,
Mhm.
with how that sort of took that detour. But
Yeah.
yeah.
That's so fun. Yeah, I just love, yeah, the like you said, the repetitive nature. You can just kind of
Hmm.
sit and just you have to just focus on that because if you lose count or you miss a stitch or do the wrong stitch, it's like, oh my God.
Hmm.
Undo
Well,
everything.
I
But
love it too for, traveling, when we take
mhm,
long car rides and, car trips or plane trips. Or I've
yeah.
always just, I'll have it in a little bag when I'm waiting at the doctor's surgery. Or,
Mhm.
any of those sort of, when you were waiting in the car when it was pouring with rain with the kids at sport. And
Yeah.
it was just, I just always have something, whether it's sewing or crochet, in my
Mhm.
hands to do. Maybe I just don't sit very well. And yeah, I'm
Yeah.
probably not very good at just sitting.
I mean, who wants to just sit though? It's always nice to have something to do
Hmm.
and it feels more productive than just, playing games on your phone or scrolling Instagram or,
Hmm.
something like that where you can actually be making something. It is nice and it's
Yeah.
so portable. You just need your hook and your yarn and, you know, It's
That's it.
helpful if you have scissors just in case something happens or you finish something and you
Yeah.
just snip the end. But yeah, you can
Yeah.
get away with very little and
Hmm.
continue to build your project. Yeah. I
Yeah.
I just bought a sweater pattern for crochet that I'm gonna try.
Hmm.
And I'm very excited. I tried to order all my yarn uh a couple days ago and there was a huge fiasco. So they had to end up canceling the order and refunding me because they tried to charge me like so much shipping. And I was like, excuse me,
Oh,
this is not how this works.
yeah.
So anyway, I'll just have to figure it out. But I'm really excited to
Yeah.
get started because I've never made clothing before. Have
Hmm.
have you?
No, I've never. I've kind of looked at it, and I've just, I've made plenty of scarves and
Mhm.
cows and all that sort of stuff, and but no, I haven't actually like. But funnily enough, my daughters recently have both come to me several times, and they've got this picture, and they're
Mm.
like, "Mum, can you make this?" And it's like this little scanty, like little crochet sort of bikini top or something, and I'm like,
No,
"No, no."
not for you.
No, but I'll give you the $7 and you can go to Supre and you can buy that for yourself. Because I just there's no way
Oh
that
my
I'm
gosh.
that I've entered down that the clothing side of crochet, and it's just not something that I love crocheting blankets, I love crocheting
Mhm.
scarves. I think because I know what they're going to look like. I've always been a little scared, I think, with clothing,
Yeah.
and jumpers and that it's just not going to look, that whole the gauge and all those sorts of things. But I mean, there's absolutely amazing makers out there who design beautiful things, and I look at them and I'm like, wow, um,
Yeah.
that's a whole nother skill, being able to sort of make something that's actually fitted and that.
Yeah.
So
I think
but,
this one will be forgiving because it's supposed to have about 10 inches extra kind of
uh,
like width across it so that it is a looser fit, which I was like, okay, that will be great because then if my gauge is too small, then it would be a little more fitted. But if my
mhm,
gauge ends up being a little too big, then at least it'll still kind of have that oversized feeling. So definitely, and it looks pretty fairly simple. I was like kind of scrolling through it again and looking, and I'm just, yeah, it's it's hopefully it turns out. I'm
mhm.
nervous, but I really, yeah, I'm like, I still want to, I think I'm like you. I'm kind of like, I love sewing and I love quilting, but I do it all day long. And yeah, to have something else crafty and creative to do with your
Mhm,
hands in the meantime, because I don't really have a space to sew at home. I just do everything at my parents' house.
mhm.
But I can crochet anywhere. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like, okay, I'm gonna get back into this and maybe not do the
Mhm.
same things I was doing before. I was making like those little coffee cozy, like the sleeves that go on your coffee cups. And
Yeah.
I was selling them at a local coffee shop, but then something happened. I had to take my display down and I just never went and put it back up. And so,
Mhm.
um, you know,
It's always such an interesting talking point too, because people generally will always it's funny, they'll ask you what you're knitting.
mhm,
But it's people really do, sitting across from, the doctors or sitting across from you on the plane, people,
mhm,
and I've been stopped, by the air hostesses and that sort
mhm,
of thing. People, I think it's something that people probably don't see every day, or or they know someone who does it, or
right.
it's and it just piques people's interest as to what you're making, or
Yeah.
yeah. So it's always a nice little sort of social interaction,
Mhm,
talking point really as well. So people, yeah, saying
yeah.
something that they necessarily haven't come across before. Or,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like maybe they've never taken taken a chance on doing something creative like that. And so
mhm,
kind of makes them go, oh, I don't think I could ever do that. I'm like, no, you could if you wanted to. It's not that
mhm,
hard. Like, I promise you, if I
yeah,
can do it, you can do it, kind of thing. But yeah, it is fun to chat with people about it that haven't necessarily done it before because they're just like enamored by watching the
mhm.
stitches come together. And I mean, I
Yeah.
I
I
do
think
too.
yeah. I think too that comes from, your exposure to that, within your home, growing up, and that's
Hmm.
certainly changed. And when I was in the classroom, most students would not have come from a home where there was a sewing machine in the house, or, necessarily even a grandparent, owned a sewing machine. And that's probably a generational, change. And,
Mhm.
um, you know, so I think, growing up has influences what you love to do, and that as well, because, if you see those things, or if those people are around you doing those,
Yeah.
they pique your interest. And you see something that maybe a lot of other kids or a lot of other people necessarily wouldn't. And yeah, definitely,
Mhm.
and I think that those become our very treasured memories, like
Yeah.
you've got that special connection with your mum. And
Mhm.
um, and like, I do with my mum and my nana. And, those are
Mhm.
the stories that really, connect you as a family,
Yeah.
as well. So I think it's, yeah, but yeah, not everyone has sewing or, craft or any sorts of, things, but, they may have other things, music, or,
Yeah.
love of, like nature and those sorts of
Mhm.
things. So I guess we all come from different backgrounds, but yeah,
Yeah.
being exposed, I think, definitely makes you grow that love for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if they don't do it themselves, then it's like they at least have that attachment to the memory and can go,
Mhm,
oh, yeah, my nana used to crochet stuff for me all the time. Or, I have the quilt that was made for me when I was a baby. It's like they do have people, a lot of people do
mhm,
have connections to it, maybe not personally because they don't do it, but because someone that loves them, you know,
mhm.
made something for them. But yeah, it's really fun. And I'm like kind of bummed that my my boys didn't really get into sewing or crocheting. Like the younger one, he was like, "Yeah, teach me to crochet." And then he like made one really, really long chain and then he was like, "I'm done." And I was like, "Okay, well." But it's like it's just funny to see that. And I think too sometimes people feel like it's more feminine to do the crafts, and it is definitely like marketed, I think, more towards women to crochet or knit or sew or quilt.
Mhm.
And um so I think too it's about how it's approached or how it's talked about, and how it was experienced in your life too, of who does it and why. So
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
interesting for sure. It's like, oh, that's a girl
Mhm.
craft. I'm like, no, it's not. Only because you say so.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's fun. We're kind of starting to teach my niece. She's gotten a little interested in learning how to sew, and my mom designed a quilt top for her to work on because she wanted all this. She was going through all of our scrap bins and pulling all these little pieces of fabric and from just about every single quilt my mom and I have ever made. And
Wow.
she's like, I want some of this. I want some of this. I want some of this. And my mom was like, okay. And so she worked her through, you know, my mom was like, I will cut the pieces and then I'll show you how to sew them together. Cause she was like, they call my mom Nana. She's like, Nana, I think that thing is too sharp for me to use. And they just turned 10,
Yep.
my twin niece and nephew, but so she's still a little hesitant around the sharp stuff, which I don't blame her.
Mhm.
But she
No.
she sewed most of her quilt top herself, and then my mom long armed it and finished it up for her. But she was so proud of it, and I was like, "This is so fun," because I think because my mom and I are so gentle around it, and we're not trying to force her. And
Mhm.
anytime she asks to try it out, we are like, "Of course, come over here. What part do you want to do?" And um, just letting her experience it how she wants to experience it, I think
Yeah.
has made a huge difference. And
Mhm.
I don't know, I think for me, I don't want to be a source of anxiety around the machines for her, because
Mhm.
not that my mom made me anxious. It was just um my nature, I guess. But I think
Mhm.
the more gentle and loving we are around it, the easier it will be for her to want to experience it. So anyway.
Yeah, and then she'll grow her own love for it, and
Yeah.
could all come back to at some point maybe, or
Hmm.
if not, have just been exposed to that as something that she did, and she'll have as a memory,
Yeah.
later down the track, and as a special connection. So
Yeah.
it's all valuable.
Yeah. It's really cool to see. And My older niece isn't interested, and my nephew is just like, whatever, I need to go throw a football. We're like, okay, bye. So it's funny, they each have their own,
Hmm.
interests, which is nice. They don't feel like they have to do one thing or the other just because someone in the family does it. But
Hmm.
yeah. How are your girls? Do they find interest in wanting to sew or
When they were younger, my older daughter loved it. She did lots of English paper piecing
mm,
hexagons, and she really loved it. We would, she would sit there and she would sew those together and kind of make pillow tops, but kind of that's as far as they would ever get. And but
yeah.
both my girls, they can thread up the machine. I know when they've been in my sewing room, because generally the bottom of the jumper that they've cropped
Yeah.
or hacked off
Uh-huh.
is sitting left in my sewing room, and I go back in there and the thread is a different color to what I knew that quilt I was pieced, or
Mhm.
there are things left out. My younger daughter, she has not really developed a love for it, but she is absolutely amazing at it.
Mm.
I've tried and sat with her a few times, and um, her piecing is just amazing. Like, she really has a real knack for it, but she doesn't have a love for it. So,
Oh, that's the
and
worst.
then
You're like, but you're so good
yeah,
at it.
I think like tailoring, just she has a real eye for detail, and I
Mm,
don't think she appreciates that as, something that, I always thought she'd be great at tailoring, or, bridal
mhm,
couture, or,
mm,
because of just that absolute having to look at every detail and aspect. And always
yeah.
thought that that might be something that, or design, and something that she would love. But look, they are both, young women now, and whilst they don't have a love of craft at this stage, I think it's something that they've been exposed to, and I want them to pick it up because they love it. I don't, it's something that, just because I think too, because I do it all the time, it's in our home, it's something that they've been completely exposed to, that maybe they kind of like, oh, I don't want to do that. That's what mum does.
Yeah.
Mum does the quilting, mum does the crochet, so it's probably not very necessarily very cool. And they're,
Sure.
they're very late teens and
Mhm.
early 20s. So yeah, they're
Okay.
busy with social media and all those other things. So
Yeah.
um, but it's something that I think that they'll have a connection to. They do. Like, my youngest daughter recently, sort of, she comes home and she's drawn this picture, and mum, I want to make this top, and I've come home with this fabric, and I'm looking at what she's done, and she's got this like little sketch, and we've all been there. We've all either got the friend
Mhm.
who's done it, or we've got, the kids who have done it, who have come to us with, because you can sew, with this
Mhm.
idea that's come from their head. There's no pattern, there's no
Yeah.
anything, but there's this whole garment that she wants to construct. And this was only about 6 weeks ago
Oh
when
gosh.
that this happened. And I looked at this pile of fabric, and there was lycra, and there was some velvet, and there
Oh my
was
gosh.
some like organza in there. And I'm like, you know what, give Nan a call. This is something that you and Nan would absolutely like, love to do together. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Pawn it
I do
off.
admit to completely handballing that one, and but they did it. Like,
Yeah.
she took that pile of fabrics to her nan's, and yeah, my mum and Ash did make this top, and yeah,
Wow.
she wore it out. So, but
Wow.
yeah, it's, you know sometimes there are things that, yeah, I am not.
Yeah. You're like, you know what? No.
Like, no, no.
Yeah. That's
This
kind of
is,
where I'm at. I'm like, if you want anything besides a quilt, you have to ask my mom because I don't know.
mhm,
I've never
yeah,
really made anything else. Like maybe I did. I was, as a teenager, I was like into making my own stuff, but I a lot of
mhm,
times would get her help because I didn't know what I was doing. So
yeah,
she would, you know, help me concoct these skirts. I would cut the inseam out of jeans and then I would fill the
mhm,
space with like batik or some other fabric to make a skirt. And that was like my big thing in the early 2000s and like the late 90s. And
Mm-hmm.
I'd make little bags if I had like leftover fabrics
Mm-hmm.
and things, but nothing that really held up or is still around because it fell
Mm-hmm.
apart. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think you just kind of have to let people come to it on their own. And especially with
Mm-hmm.
kids, it's like you don't want to force them because then they would really probably hate it. And, yeah, maybe when they're
That's it.
more mature and have kind of explored different things, they'll come to whatever makes them happy. And whether it's sewing or crochet, that's cool. And if it's something else,
Mm-hmm.
then that's also cool because they're still using their creative brain. And that's really all that
That's it.
matters.
Mm-hmm. That's it. Yeah. Showing them and leading them, are two different things. So,
Yeah.
and it has to come from within them. It doesn't, you can have all the things, and even when you have students, in your quilting
Mhm.
classes and all that sort of thing, like that desire, to want to create really does have to come from within, because
Yeah.
if it's something that you're not enjoying, or something that you were forced to do, and you have that connection to that,
Hmm.
then it's something that you're potentially not going to enjoy. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Mhm.
yeah, I was going to relate it back to teaching too. Like you have to have a gentle hand with a lot of it and just say, hey, here's how this thing works. And,
Mhm.
and then set them free and let them do what they want to do. And I think ultimately
Yeah.
just that support and, willingness to show them how you do what you do. I
Mhm.
think, if you think about your path to quilting as a business and my path to quilting as a business, like we both got there in very different routes from just like,
Mhm.
oh, I woke up one day and I decided I was going to be an entrepreneur and make a quilting business and I never did anything else. It's,
Mhm.
you know, I started nursing school and then I changed to elementary education and then I did that for 8 years and while I was trying to figure my life out and it's definitely taken some twists and turns, but
Mhm.
I also think that experience outside of that creative world helped helped me learn different aspects of how to make the business work in different ways and you know customer relations wise, like I've
Mhm.
talked to some wild parents, I've dealt with some crazy kids, and that all that experience feeds into being able to handle customer service situations. And not that we've had
Mhm.
anybody crazy, but
Well, like, it's that whole, like I mentioned, that building blocks, everything,
Mhm.
just, the skills that you learn and in that just become transferable into other areas. And yeah, you can
Yeah,
specialize with those.
yeah, that's so cool. um I just actually saw right before we got on here, that you you like rewrote one of your patterns and you're re-releasing
Hmm.
it. Okay. So tell me about
Yeah.
that. How did that come about?
Well, when I started quilting, and releasing patterns, obviously this quilting space was very different, and
Mhm.
we you wrote a pattern, and the pattern was for one size. Multiple sizes has really been something that's come about the last few years, and
Okay.
offering within a pattern multiple sizes, but most of my very original ones are only written for one size.
Okay.
And um, what I obviously my skills have grown, not only in my sewing, but also in terms of my writing and my ability to use Illustrator to add graphics, and also taking feedback, because the pattern, when people see it, they're like, oh, I want to make it bigger.
Mhm.
How do I make it bigger? And I love going back, and the patterns that I've done, and I've called it like a pattern glow up,
Mm.
literally sort of taking that original pattern, re reworking it, adding new sizes, adding new bits of information, or
Mm.
instructions, or clarifying something that may have been something that someone's gone off. I'm not not sort of sure what you mean here, and just being able to offer a design that I know has worked and people have loved, but
Mhm.
looking at it now from, you know, a quilting perspective today. And yeah, so Back to the Future is one of my designs that I'll be really re-releasing in a few weeks, and it's going to have new sizes, also templates and those sorts of things. Because back when I wrote the pattern originally, I was able to add templates once templates kind of became popular and on the scene. But even when I first wrote it, like acrylic templates weren't really, part of quilting. So
Okay.
just being able, and I think it just comes back to, being a teacher and wanting to learn and wanting to grow myself, and actually revisiting my own work and being able to now improve and offer a better pattern and offer a better way for everyone, to make that bigger size. Because, I've upsized the actual blocks rather than just, before, when the pattern was one size, it was like, we'll just add more blocks, where
Right.
now I've actually upsized it and,
Okay.
designed a new template for that, new size. So
Yeah.
being able to improve and grow and offer something that people have loved,
Mhm.
and make it better.
Yeah, that's so cool, and I love to see that because I think sometimes we're like, "Okay, I'm done with that, I don't need to revisit it," but I think if
Hmm.
it's a well-loved pattern or, just a well-loved product of yours that the people who love you love, it's like, "Well, here, let me make it better for you." It's like
Hmm.
we're here for the quilty community and not just for ourselves, but so I think, yeah, when we can find ways to make things better for them, it really
Hmm.
just helps us grow as people, but helps them grow too. Because I think the better the instructions are and clearer mm, the clearer things are, the easier it is to accomplish your goal instead of feeling frustrated and like, "Oh, I hate this pattern." 'Cause
Hmm.
I've experienced that
Yeah.
a few times too, where I'm like, "This is literally the worst pattern I've ever wrote, not I can't talk, read, like, with instructions all over the place and no real clear
Hmm.
trajectory of like how to best approach it and having to essentially rewrite how things go because of how unclear the steps were. And so when
Hmm.
a pattern is written well, it makes a huge difference. And I love that you upsized your blocks for the larger size of the quilt because I think you're right. Most patterns are like, oh, you just add more rows and columns and
Hmm.
you just keep making more of the same block. But I think sometimes that, yeah, if the blocks are a little smaller, that feels kind of daunting and tedious. And so if the blocks are just bigger, you still get the
Hmm.
overall effect of the quilt, but it's a
Yeah.
little more achievable to
Hmm.
accomplish a larger quilt. That's
Yeah.
really,
Well, we have, and the thing is too, like there are people who are new to my audience who
yeah.
would not have been exposed to it back when I originally released it. And I think too, there's that whole part of me that thinks, if you open up Instagram any day of the week, there's, a new pattern release and a new pattern release and all this sort of thing.
Mhm.
And I think that there's a lot of value in what we've done before,
Yeah.
and not it this whilst it's a re-release, it's an older pattern and there's no less value in it being a pattern that I wrote many years ago,
Right.
for it being something that's just as beautiful and can be easily made, and I really hope people enjoy making now. So
Yeah.
I think it kind of just slows that whole consumerism,
Mhm.
like having to churn out something new every single time, and seeing value in going back and having a look at things that you've done before, and it not being any less valuable to re-release a pattern than
Yeah.
having to come up with a brand new design and a brand new concept, and is
Yeah.
this going to be the one that's going to break the internet, and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. Like, it's not pressure, but it's that feeling sometimes that you've always got to have something new.
Mhm.
And I like being able to go back, and I did this the glow up I did last year with my Liberty Bell quilt,
Mhm.
and it was highly successful in that people new to my audience can go back and they can make a pattern that they hadn't seen necessarily before, because it's not one that I've made in the last couple of years, even though I sort of always will make new versions when I'm working
Yeah.
with fabrics and that. But also just, yeah, seeing value, I think, in things that we have done before, and not always having to
Yeah. Yeah.
always come up with a brand new concept.
Yeah. And that idea is daunting. And I was kind of talking about that in terms of like creating social media content because it's like I don't always
Mhm.
have something new to say and I don't want to just get on there to get on there and be one of those people that's like, so I'm not doing anything today. And it's like, if I put something out, I want it to be valuable. And I think it's, yeah, that refocus on what can I do with what I already have? And is there
Hmm.
a way to just freshen it up so that, yeah, to new people, to new followers, it looks
Hmm.
new and fresh. And maybe, people have been around for a while. Maybe they still want to see that again. And who knows, maybe they'll repurchase the pattern because to them it's valuable that
Hmm.
maybe they've made it before, maybe they didn't make the old one, and now they can have a new experience with something that's already been out there. And yeah, I think that is a valuable practice, just not just in normal life, but in business too. Because you're right, that consumerism of everything new, everything shiny all the time, like always have to be doing something new, gets really tiring. And I don't think it's necessarily good for our mental health either. Of
Hmm.
always feeling like, oh, if I don't have a new idea, I'm going to lose everyone, and I'm not going to have a business, and it's just not true. And so
Hmm.
I really like seeing that, and it's exciting because it is like a new release all over again, and
Hmm. Yeah.
get to share
Well, that's it.
something.
I mean, there's just as much work in re-releasing it, and I've made, had to make just as many, new samples, and I've had a photo shoot, and I've done, the pattern, has gone through all the sort of the same process,
Yeah.
but it's that not having to reinvent the wheel,
Hmm.
but I'm offering something new in terms of, yeah, something that's worked well, and I know people love. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and I know that there are people who, may have made, the original one, but who will love the fact that there's now the upsized version as well. So,
Yeah. It gives them something new to try with the same
mhm,
pattern, and that's really
yeah,
fun.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
think too that, I've tried to pick things that have skills that people can learn. So for,
Mhm.
with Back to the Future, it's learning curves, and because a lot of a lot of my quilts are very geometric. And
Yeah.
or triangles and that sort of thing, so it also gives people the chance to learn a new skill. So, or
Yeah.
try and, be confident enough to tackle a new skill, and know that sort of there's some tips and tricks that, I share with that to help and guide them through.
Yeah. Yeah. Curves can be intimidating, but I think there is
Hmm.
so much out there to help. And I think any pattern I've followed with curves, I the ones I have followed have felt really intentionally like
Hmm.
helpful to, if you've never sewn a curve before, follow these steps. And you know, just a lot of patience and a lot of pinning
Hmm.
sometimes, and you'll get there. And so I really do appreciate that aspect, because when it is a new skill, it's like you want your instructions to be
Hmm.
detailed and concise, and give you the right information. And so I think, yeah, going back and checking through those directions, making sure that they do
Hmm.
make sense even for new quilters is important. And I think as educators, we're pressed to be reflective and,
Hmm.
go back and think about what we've done and how we could improve it, or what went really well and how we could, reiterate that again. And I think I'm pretty naturally reflective. I think a lot of that is anxiety. but but it works well in this environment of like, okay, I just made something. How did it go? What could I do to improve the process next time? And on sometimes some patterns, I'm like, I'm never making that thing again. And then literally a couple months later, a client will be like, I really want this quilt. And I'm like, oh, why? I'm just kidding. But so I think when I see that in people that I like and
Hmm.
follow and, you know, feel connected to, it makes me feel more connected to that person. Like, oh, they really took the time to make this feel better for the people that, love them. And that reflective nature, I think, is just, it's so valuable, so valuable in all aspects of life. So
Hmm.
I do love to see it out in the world. And so it really, when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool.
Hmm.
But sorry, my throat is like so dry right now.
That's all right.
Oh, okay. So that being said, with that pattern, so you just recently released a book with quilt and crochet patterns in it. So I
Yeah.
need to know all about this thing because it is right up my alley.
hmm Yeah, well, as I mentioned earlier, I kind of accidentally took a little deep, and I don't know that detour is the right word, but I was because I had been crocheting quite a lot at nighttime. I really started to look at um, how could I turn like my quilt patterns. I kind of kept seeing how similar my quilt patterns were, and in terms of, could I try to turn this into a crochet pattern? And that's kind of what sort of kicked off this whole new sort of area for me, introducing crochet patterns, because I was playing around with what's now known as my Merryweather blanket, which actually it's the exact replica of my Aurora quilt. So
Okay.
I thought, how can I want to turn this Aurora quilt into a crochet blanket, and how do I go about that? And is it possible? And so I did. And people, I think too, during that time, of lockdown, and people were learning new skills and all that sort of thing. So people was, and I think too, people were starting to see that, just because you quilt, they had maybe forgotten, that they could crochet, or that they would love to learn to crochet, or
Yeah.
people were learning new skills. And sort of, I guess that's kind of where the whole premise for the book came from, in that I had turned my quilt pattern into a crochet design. And so essentially, when I sat down to write this third book, which is titled Quilt It, Crochet It, I sat down very much with the intention of writing a book that offered both the pattern in a quilt and then also in an identical crochet version. So, and that took a little bit of work to be able to keep them not only identical, because I've really tried to. Every quilt looks exactly the same in a crochet version, and also to keep it at that beginner level, so that if you're new to quilting, you could pick it up and you could make any of the quilt patterns in the book. Or if you're new to crochet, you could pick it up and crochet any of those designs. So it was very much about keeping that simplicity of being able to offer both crafts to everyone.
Yeah.
So
That's so
so that's been really fun to sort of see that go out into the world. And it really, the common comment that I sort of get from people is, oh, I learned how to crochet, or I've always wanted to learn how to crochet, or I want a couple of quilt patterns in my repertoire that are, I can put on repeat. And or I've not known where to start with quilting, but I love this design. So it really, that sort of introduction to either craft, and being able to make any of the designs in the book.
Yeah. That's so fun. Yeah. The first kind of, I guess, exposure I had to thinking that, being even just thinking that anything crochet could be translated to quilting was that the first pattern I tested for Katerina Rocella was her Travailla quilt. And she made that quilt pattern based on a crochet motif. And I was like,
Oh, wow.
what the heck? That's so cool. And um, just the creativity that had to come with, how it came together to create the design of it. And I have talked about it 1,000 times on the show, and it's in my Instagram a million times. So I'm sure if, people want to see it, they can dig it up. But um, so then when I saw that your book was going to be that, I was like, this is such a cool concept, because I think sometimes, if you're a quilter and you have other skills, sometimes you just want to try something different. And so the fact that you offer it in the same book is just so cool, because you might love the pattern of the quilt and not really want to be quilting, but you can make it as crochet and use your other skill or learn that new skill. And I just thought that was so ingenious, and I'm just very excited by the idea. So I just was.
I've had a few people reach out, and one of them, maybe a quilter, and they have a friend who knows how to crochet, and I've had this come from several people, or the vice versa. They're into crochet and their friend loves to quilt, and it's something that they've been able to, tell me that they're actually making, the same pattern, but they're doing it together. And it's just
Yeah.
been interesting that, a number of people have reached out and said that, that's what they've loved about the book, is that it offered a way for them to connect with their friends or their family, or, my mum's going to make the quilt, to the crochet blanket, or,
Yeah.
someone else that they know, my friend is going to make, this, and we're going to make the same together. And that's really great too, that people, can be connected through the pages of the book.
Yeah. That's so inspiring too, because it's not leaving anyone out, as far as whether a yarn crafter or fabric crafter, you've got an avenue to make something really cool.
Hmm.
So what was that
Yeah.
like, translating the pattern over, whether it was crochet first or quilting first? And did you make all the crochet patterns to try them out?
Yeah. So every single quilt in the book and every single crochet blanket or um, pillow, yeah, I made. And definitely the crochet side of things took a lot longer.
Mhm.
I was, I can churn out a quilt pretty quickly once I've got the pattern decided and once I've got the fabric set,
Yeah.
and sewing it is really, that can be a couple of days of,
Hmm.
something finished. Where the crochet side of things, that was, the whole hand time frame of making a blanket is completely different.
Yeah.
So I yes, spent many nights furiously crocheting to keep up with those. But it was very much, yeah, sitting down, and there was a lot of planning, because not only did I want the quilts and the crochet blankets or the crochet projects to look the same, I also translated that in terms of color. So
Hmm.
many of the projects, I've literally used the same color fabrics that I've used the yarn for, and I was
Mm.
very intentional about that, so that side by side, it was like, which one's which.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
also just, I that's how close I kind of wanted people to see that you could have crochet and quilting. So, very much sitting down, working out my colors and my fabrics, and probably that process of matching everything up took probably a little bit longer
Hmm.
than normal. When you're sort of pulling fabrics for a quilt or that sort of thing, you're kind of not necessarily needing it to match to anything. But I very intentionally wanted everything to translate color wise, so that they looked similar as well, so that, yeah,
Yeah.
it would have that aesthetic through the book as well, that cohesiveness, even though that they were both very completely different
Right.
crafts.
Right. Yeah. And I think
So
that's important too, with seeing patterns. And because even the same pattern, if it's in two different fabrics or two different colorways, they look very
mhm.
different. So I think, yeah, if you had done the quilt in one way and done the crochet in another way, it would have maybe been like throwing people off visually, even though it would be the
Yeah.
same pattern. But that, I think the color matching is so smart too, because I think people see colors or see the way something's made and they love that. And so
Mhm.
they want a similar feel. So it just probably, in my mind, probably made it easier to look at too. It's not too busy.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, in terms of already being, something that offered two different crafts, it was like, how do I bring that together, and how do I make that look, not confusing for the reader, or how do I, interweave it so that they're not two separate crafts, but they're very,
Mhm.
they have so many similar traits, whether, you love to, quilt, or whether you love to crochet. But
Yeah.
yeah, how to interweave those. So hopefully I've done that. Yeah, so that people, yeah, do pick it up, and yeah, are inspired to try something new, or to make something that they already, you know, would have done, even if it wasn't filled with the other craft. So
Yeah. Yeah. And then it's like it's a 2 for 1. You have a quilting book and you have a crochet book and you can choose. And
mhm.
that's really neat. I just love that concept. And it's, yeah. as a quilter and crocheter, I was like, oh, this is exactly up my alley. And I just, I was so excited by that. And, you
Hmm.
know, to find other people who do what you do, like we were saying at the beginning, it's so nice to be able to talk to people like that get it. And I don't have to say, like, okay, so there's this thing, and then, this is part of this detail. I can just say, oh, my 7 skeins of yarn got returned because they tried to triple my shipping and I told them to cancel it. And you can be like, oh, that's so sucky. I don't have to be
Yeah.
like, so a skein of yarn is like the ball of yarn. And then I needed this many to make this sweater. And like, we don't have to do that. And it's so nice to not have to
Hmm.
jump through those little hoops to be able to talk about it. So,
Yeah. My husband the other night, because I was winding some yarn, and he's like, so why don't you buy it like this? And I'm like, well, that's not how a skein comes, because the skein has been through a different process, and generally it's hand dyed. So
mhm,
and it's so even now I still have those conversations where
yeah.
someone sees what you're doing, and you're like, what, those things that we take for granted that we learn and know. People are like, why would you just not buy a ball of wool?
You're like, I'll tell
Why
you
would you not
why.
buy it like
Yeah.
that?
Like, do you really want to know, or do you just want to just know that I have to do this? Like,
Yeah.
because I think
And
sometimes,
generally I've paid a lot more money to have to wind it myself.
yeah, exactly. You're like, funnily enough, this is more expensive this way.
Yeah, yeah. I leave that bit out. I leave that bit out.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially for the husband, right?
Yeah.
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 I'll come home and my husband will be like, oh, how was your day? How did everything go? And I'll be like, do you really want to know, or do you just want like the shortened, like dumbed down version? And he was like, sometimes he'll be like,
Sometimes.
no, tell me all of it. And I'm like, okay, are you ready? Do you need to take notes? And then sometimes he's like, no, you can just summarize it for me. And so then I'll just tell him, little bits and pieces. But
Mhm.
he's starting to
Yeah.
pick things up, which is nice. But at the same time, I'm still like, no, then this thing. I'm like, oh, never mind. I don't want to explain this
Mhm.
anymore.
Yeah. My husband, he'll be if I'm talking about something, and he'll be like, is this real life stress or is this fabric stress? Like, so there's obviously quite a big difference in life, whether it's to do with your real life, or if it's, and granted, fabric stress in my house can be pretty
I'm like, that is
pretty
real
pretty
stress.
tough,
Yeah.
like, yeah, having all the fabric in the world and still not having the color that I need, or
Hmm.
having a dedeline to meet. So yeah,
Yeah.
fabric stress is a bit of a comical term around our house. Yes, this is fabric stress.
That's funny. Is this real stress or fabric stress? Well, yeah, it is real stress because
Yeah,
there's a lot at
it's real
stake.
stress
And
to me.
yeah, it's like, no, this is stress because this is my livelihood. And if things don't work out right, then there's problems. And
Hmm. Yeah.
boys, no, that's so funny. I love that though,
Hmm.
because it's like, all right, okay, step away. It's just fabric, because it
Yeah.
can get very like overwhelming. And
Hmm.
yeah, if it's like you have this vision in your head and you just don't quite have the right things, and the idea of like having to try to hunt that down and figure it out is like, oh, I have to go to every fabric store. Shopping online is dicey because you can't see the exact colors and
Hmm.
don't know if the tones are going to match or if it's going to be
Yeah.
slightly off and ruin the entire thing. So,
Yeah.
color theory is important. That's
That's it.
it's like underrated, I think, for how much it matters to the process
Hmm.
of designing something. And if the colors aren't right, it's going to be ugly. And the whole reason we're doing what we're doing is to make beautiful stuff,
Hmm.
not
That's
ugly
it.
stuff. But
Yeah.
that's so cool. Well, so your book is called Quilt It, Crochet It,
Yes.
and it's out now. Where can people buy
Yes.
it online anywhere specific
Yeah,
or?
so it's you can buy it on Amazon. It's available through Fox Chapel Publishing and Landau Publishing. It's also stores can also wholesale it in the US through Checkers, as well as Fox Publishing. And yeah, I have it at my website. I'm waiting for my shipment to arrive here in Australia.
Okay.
So I'll have it on my website very soon. That's available, yeah, for pre-order on my website. But yeah, no, it's been yeah, exciting journey, sort of writing my third book. It was, a bit of a therapy session for myself, in terms of, getting back into writing after having had my first two books. But
Yeah.
I love that process of, it's a very different process writing a book to writing a pattern. So
Mhm.
it's a different sort of element of what you do. And I think as a teacher, and I think I'll always call myself a teacher,
Yeah.
that writing a book really is teaching and walking someone through how to do it, and being able to weave stories in, or being able to weave other elements in. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's such a cool undertaking, and I'm so glad you were able to make your vision come to life of having quilting and crocheting come together. And
Hmm.
I am looking forward to getting my hands on a copy because I'm really excited to. I would just thought it would be fun to maybe experience that with like my mom and have her make the quilt and
Hmm.
me crochet the blanket, and so we can
Yeah,
have matching set, but not necessarily the same thing. So I thought that would be
that's
fun.
perfect. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah, well, that's awesome. And thank you so much for joining me today. I've loved getting to know you and kind of connecting on our shared kind of life experiences of being teachers and crocheting and quilting and momming and all those things.
Yeah,
So
thank you for having me, Amanda. It's always so good to chat to people who you meet on Instagram. And
yeah,
so many quilty friends, that I've met literally through Instagram. and
yeah,
and that's just, it's such a powerful connection to have with people who are across the other side of the world,
yeah,
and feel that you have, just sat down and had a chat in your living room, or yeah.
yeah,
Love connecting with people through that. And it's been
yeah,
great to get to know you.
yeah. Thanks. And again, everybody go buy the book. You're Tied with a Ribbon on Instagram, and I will link everything in the show notes so that people can just get to you in one click. So it's nice and easy. And other than that, we'll talk to you soon, hopefully.
Thanks, Amanda.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Hey, if you're listening, thank you so much for being here. I just wanted to put it out there that I now have Patreon active. If you haven't checked it out, it's patreon.com/notyourgranny's quilt show. If you sign up to be a patron, you get a Not Your Granny's Quilt Show sticker sent right to your door. So go over there and sign up today. I'm also looking for stars, reviews. Just show me some love over on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. On Spotify now, you can do a Q&A at the bottom of the episode. So if you're listening, you can kind of scroll down, and underneath the picture, there should be a Q&A section. Sometimes I'll put out a poll just to see what you guys think about the episode, or have you answer a question about something that happens in the episode. So I'll be looking out for that. And I would just love to see your reviews and comments. Also, if you haven't already, head over to YouTube at Not Your Granny's Quilt Show and subscribe today. I do a lot of visuals. Sometimes there's extra content you can see on the YouTube videos. And so if you're just listening, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. But I'd love to see you over on YouTube as well. If you subscribe, go ahead and drop a comment on one of the episodes to let me know that you're there. Thank you so much for being here with me, and I love you, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.